Hey everyone, good evening. This is episode 8 of Healthy Kids Simple Solutions. So we're just breezing right through them, but today what I'm going to be talking about primarily are kids that struggle with reading, whether that's reading comprehension, whether that's reading speed, and then maybe they have a developmental delay, maybe they have an abnormal neurological issue going on. Many of these kids, if it's one of those three things or all three of them, either or, they have a specific retained primitive reflex that's called an ATNR. It's an Asymmetric Tonic Neck Reflex. So what is an ATNR? An ATNR is something that we're born with. So we have it as an infant. We actually have it before we're even born. So when you see an infant and they turn their head this way, this arm's reflexively going to extend in and this arm's going to reflexively flex in. Same thing happens with your feet or your legs. So what this does is it stimulates kicking in the womb. It builds muscle tone in the womb. It actually assists in developing the vestibular system. So really what it does is it's moving your arms and your legs and your limbs based on where your head moves. So it's reflexively making your limbs move, which are basically teaching your brain how to move your own limbs. So it's there as kind of a training wheel, and it's supposed to obviously be there when you're born, but then at about the 6-month mark is when it should have done its job, should have developed everything correctly, and then it should go away at, like I said, about 6 or 7 months of age. So if it didn't do what it was supposed to do at that time, you're going to hold on to it, and you're never going to necessarily get rid of it. You're just going to retain it. And the reason that that's a problem is it's supposed to just be a training wheel. It's supposed to just be there for a little bit of time to kind of get your brain over the hump of developing, and then it should go away. So if it sticks around, it's going to be very stressful for the brain. Your brain's really going to have to fight through this reflex that should be gone by the time you are school-aged. So when you think of your brain, you have this corpus callosum. It's the middle part of your brain. So your brain has two halves, and then there's this little bridge in between that lets the two communicate between each other, and it's the corpus callosum. So it helps the left and the right side of the brain talk to each other. And what the ATNR does is it helps develop that part of the brain. It helps develop that bridge. So if it didn't develop properly, kids are going to have a hard time what's called crossing the midline, which is basically meaning they're going to have a hard time, their brain's going to have a hard time, the left brain talking to the right brain, and especially talking to them simultaneously and using it as one cohesive unit. So if you think of not being able to cross the midline, one primary example I'm talking about with these kids is if you're picturing them reading across a line. Once they cross what's called the midline here, their eyes reflexively want to shoot off and get off target of that line. So that's just one thing. They might have issues tying their shoes. They might have issues catching a ball. Anything that involves crossing the midline of your body, they're going to struggle with. So when this ATNR doesn't go away, it can actually be responsible for a number of developmental delays, neurological abnormalities. They're going to have difficulties with movement and coordination, vision and balance, just overall cognition and brain, what I call brain power. Learning challenges, they're going to have issues with crawling most likely. When they were little, they most likely had issues with crawling and walking ability. Their reading is obviously going to suffer, and their handwriting, they may not like sports because that hand-eye coordination is off, and then behavioral issues as well. So it can cause a whole host of things. It's basically going to disrupt the foundation for balance. So your body needs to be balanced. You need to have that hand-eye coordination. Your eyes need to track smoothly. You need to have something called binocular vision. So with these kids, they don't do it very well. So they have blurring or double vision when they read. This ATNR is often noticed in kids that have educational or motor difficulties. So this is by far the most common primitive reflex I find in the office. There are a whole bunch of different reflexes that we test for in the office, but the ATNR is by far and away the most common one that I see in the office. If I just had to guess, I would say 80 to 90% of kids that come in the office, and usually they're coming in with some type of, maybe it's ADHD, or maybe they can't concentrate or sit still, or maybe they have anxiety or whatever it is. I would just guess off the top of my head 80 to 90% of kids have this ATNR. So it is a very common primitive reflex. Other things you could see in a kid that have a retained ATNR, they may have troubles telling their left and right apart. So if your kid for a long time struggles between left and right, and that's because they have an issue communicating from the left and right brain. They could have trouble catching a ball because of their hand-eye coordination. There's actually a study done that I think 50% of kids that had a retained ATNR reported to have dyslexia. A guy by the name of Harold Bloomberg conducted a study where he found that dyslexia, kids that had dyslexia and had an ATNR, when they remediated it and got rid of that ATNR and they no longer had it, they had significant improvement in their reading ability compared to the control group. So it's pretty cool that you have this ATNR, but then obviously you can go in and stimulate the brain in certain ways to get rid of it. Kids with an ATNR, they're going to struggle with something called ocular pursuit, which you need when you read, not being able to cross that midline efficiently, which you need, and then also a saccades, which means when you get to the end of the line, you quickly bring your eyes back to the next line and read it, and then quickly bring your eyes back to the next line. So they do all three of those things very inefficiently, so this ATNR can cause a lot of issues with that eye tracking and reading problem. It's going to take a lot of extra effort, and they're going to have really intense concentration just to be able to move their eyes smoothly. So they have to really focus on just making their eyes do what they want it to, that it's obviously going to lead to a slower reading speed and lowered comprehension because they're focused so much on just making their eyes move the way that they should that there's no mental resources left to actually retain what they're reading. So usually kids with the ATNR, they hate reading. They never want to read because their eyes essentially aren't working the way that they should, and their eyes are reflexively doing things that are working against them. Their handwriting could also be bad. So the reason for this is if you think of when you are looking this way, you naturally want to open all of this up and extend. So if you're looking at your paper while you're writing, this hand's always wanting to come open. And the reason that that's an issue is because you can't grip the pencil when you're reflexively, your hands are wanting to come open because it's just a reflex that you have. So what you do is they usually compensate and have an overly tight grip. And then, they usually are going to frequently shake their hand out from a hand cramp. They're probably going to break a lot of lead when they're writing because they're gripping that pencil so tight because reflexively it's wanting to open up because of this ATNR. This is actually a reflex that I had. I had it because I didn't know what primitive reflexes were, just like most of you guys, and then I started learning about it and then obviously tested myself to see what reflexes I had. And I had this ATNR. It was probably the strongest one I had, and I hated reading all through elementary school, middle school, high school. I usually never read. I never really picked up reading until college. And I also had horrible handwriting, and I always gripped the pencil so tight and broke so much lead. So it just made sense to me that it's like, oh, I had that ATNR. That makes sense now. Another common thing that kids with an ATNR struggle with is riding a bicycle. One, because of their hand-eye coordination, but two, if you think of when I said you turn your head this way and this side of the body opens up and this side flexes in, if they're riding a bike and they move their head at all, they're reflexively wanting to take that handlebar wherever their head goes, because that's the reflex that they have. They can't, their limbs want to move reflexively depending on where their head is placed. So that's also a really tricky thing for kids with an ATNR. So not only like catching a ball, sports, just general gross motor movements, as well as riding a bike. And reading is the biggest thing that I see improve with kids once we get rid of that ATNR. So we have a workshop on February 26th at 7 o'clock at the Mark. It's, let's see here, Tuesday, 7 o'clock, Tuesday, February 26th at the Mark. And we're going to be covering things similar to this. We're going to be covering all the different primitive reflexes I check for in the office. This is just one of them. There are many more that contribute to a lot of school-related issues. So if you thought this was interesting and you want to learn more about primitive reflexes, this workshop is going to be the perfect opportunity for you to attend and be able to get all that information. And it's a free workshop. Share it with any parent that you think that would benefit from this. And, if you're looking for another parent to go with you to this, ask them to come with you, RSVP on that Eventbrite link, and I hope to see you guys there. As for what do you do once you find out that you have an ATNR, so that's the first step, is obviously a primitive reflex assessment and exam in the office. We'll see which reflexes they have, if they have any. Maybe they don't have any, maybe they have a bunch. And then from there, we're able to give you the exercises you need to do at home to get rid of them in combination to care in the office, and that really speeds up the process of getting rid of these things. So that's what I have for you this evening. I really hope you enjoyed it. I will jump back on tomorrow evening for episode 9, so I hope to see you guys there. So stay tuned, and I will see you guys tomorrow night.